This episode is supported by the Felmers-Chaney Advocacy Board, or FCAB. FCAB is an advocacy board comprised of private citizens guided by a shared concern for social justice, corrections policy, and the successful re-entry of former inmates as they return to their communities.
The 411 Live.
Where you can learn about issues that affect us every day. State of world, 411 Live.
Real people, real talk.
Made to help people in our community in every way. For your girl, 411 Live.
Is the criminal justice system fair? Are there disparities? More than any other group, young Black male defendants are more likely to be sentenced to incarceration in jail than probation. Is that evidence? What if I were to tell you that young Black males are also more likely to get a shorter jail sentence than any other group? Does that change your perception? Hello, everyone. This is the 411 Live. Real people, real talk. I'm Beverly Taylor. Joining me to talk about all of this is Tina Freiburger. She is the Dean of the Helen Bader School of Social Welfare at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. Tina, welcome.
Thank you.
Okay. So I should also mention that you co-authored an article, The Joint Effects of Race, Ethnicity, Gender, and Age on the Incarceration and Sentence Length Decisions. That's a mouthful, but very good article. And we'll be talking about this. But I'm just wondering, sentencing research, what made you go in that direction?
Yeah, well, I became interested really in graduate school on just how punishment decisions are made, because we all learn about how our system is supposed to operate and the objectives of the system that, punishment decisions are supposed to be based on, the severity of the offense, the need to protect the public. However, if there are other factors that are influencing those decisions that shouldn't be, like an individual's race, gender, their age, then those things we really want to uncover those, because in order for us to change them and to do something about them, we first have to identify them and know that they actually exist. So I just became interested in looking at these decisions because they do have profound impacts on people's lives, and to see, are these decisions being made the way that we want them to be made?
Tell me about the impact of living near Huntsville, Texas.
Yes. So when I was in graduate school, I received my master's degree from Sam Houston State University. And Sam Houston is actually the College of Criminal Justice and Criminology is right across from the Walls Unit, which is the prison in Texas that does all the executions. So I am from Wisconsin, so we've never had executions. So it was very different for me. And it was just a real shock, because things, states do have executions and you do hear the frequency at which they occur, but to actually be there and to see, because every time there's an execution, there'd be protesters and so forth, and it'd be in the news. And so it was very apparent that an execution was happening. Not to downplay incarceration. Incarceration has a huge impact on individuals, but, just seeing people being put to death, it just really made me think about, how are these decisions made, and are they really being made in the best interest of our communities and in accordance to the intentions and the goals of the system? And that again led me to just question: are there other factors that are at play here that should be looked at?
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm glad you did the research and you're doing the research. Let me break down this article a little bit. Again, it examines the impact of race, ethnicity, gender, and age on judges' decisions to sentence defendants to probation, jail, or prison in Milwaukee County, I should add.
Right.
Now, who is most likely to be incarcerated or given probation based on race?
Yeah, so the research that I did examined whether, looked at the decision to punish as a decision between incarceration and not incarceration, and if the decision was to incarcerate, whether the decision was between jail and prison. So looking at the first part of that, the decision to put somebody on probation or give someone a community sanction versus a jail sanction, what I found was that for women, were less likely to receive jail. They were more likely to receive probation, which is pretty common across sentencing literature. And also, unfortunately, pretty common is that Black men were more likely to receive jail than any other group. So, and if Black men were young, they were even more likely to receive jail over probation. And this is with all things equal, the severity of the offense, the prior record of the individual. So as age was a mitigating factor for all other groups, it was an aggravating factor for young Black men. So they were more likely to get jail, where other groups, white males, Hispanic males, white females, Black females, they were all less likely to receive jail if they were young.
You mentioned this earlier, kind of the thought process for judges, the things that they should be considering when they're rendering their sentence. And I went through your research and I saw the three basic things. And one was blameworthiness. Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, so blameworthiness just it basically is what it sounds like. It is how responsible the person is for the crime that they committed. So that can be influenced by things like the severity of the offense, and also like what role they had in the offense. So whether it was a more secondary role versus more of a primary role. So that's the kind of things that are considered in that measure.
And the other one was community protection, which is kind of self-explanatory, but I'll let you elaborate on that.
Right. So community protection is just, who is considered to be more dangerous. So obviously individuals who commit more serious crimes are considered to be more risk to the public than those who commit more minor offenses. Violent offenders are usually considered to be greater risk to public safety. So all of those things, and prior record, obviously. So somebody has a more lengthy prior record, then that's usually an indicator that they're more likely to recidivate.
And the third one was practical constraints.
Yeah, so practical constraints can consider two things. One, it can be organizational constraints. So just, how much space is there at the jail, for instance. And it can also include more individual factors, like what kind of responsibilities does the person who's being sentenced have? So do they have, for instance, like childcare responsibilities? Are they employed? How much of an impact will their incarceration have on the individual being sentenced and also the community?
Okay, so you have these three concerns, and the judge is ready to sentence the person. Do judges have time to look at all of these concerns with every defendant?
Unfortunately, not. And that's where this other concept of the perceptual shorthand comes into play. So, contrary to what we see on TV, where everyone has these lengthy trials and, the judge is listening to all the evidence and listening to everything, most sentencing decisions are made pretty quickly in reality, in a real courtroom. And so, judges don't have a lot of information in a lot of cases. So, they have to kind of make a decision quickly based on the limited time and information that they actually have. And that's when things like gender, race, and age come into play, because these things just unconsciously, through kind of stereotypes that every individual holds, lead to conclusions about blameworthiness and protection of the community and practical constraints that are not based on the factors that we want them to be based on, such as severity of offense and prior record, but instead these other kind of these demographic factors come into play through these stereotypes, and then it can lead to unconscious bias. So when you have, for instance, like a young Black man who's more often associated with like an offender from media and TV and so forth, then that can give off kind of this idea or this stereotype that person is more dangerous and a greater threat to our community and more blameworthy, and also their incarceration is not as great of a burden for our society to carry. So it's kind of through these unconscious biases that these things then come into play.
That's right, because I was thinking about, um, throughout our history and our time, young Black men, just looking at them, even when you go to the level of being arrested, the officers, young Black man, danger.
Mhm.
There are things that pop in their minds unconsciously or consciously, I don't know, but, danger, and it's like there's something it makes me think of the A written, with the Hawthorne novel, the A
Yeah.
on the
Yeah.
person. It's like something's written on their chest,
Mhm.
and
Yeah, and there's been a lot of studies that have been done in psychology and so forth that find that these are very real things, even though we don't want to think about ourselves as being biased because a lot of times they are unconscious and we don't want to be part of that. We don't want to think that we're subject to that, but in reality everyone is. And that's too why I'm so passionate about this research, because it's this kind of research. It's by looking at the data and seeing what's going on that we can recognize, okay, this is having an impact. So when individuals and judges are making these decisions and prosecutors are making these decisions, they can say, I know this bias is there. I'm going to recognize it, and I'm going to then make sure that I'm not, my decisions are not being influenced by it.
right. Okay, here's another one when we talk about perception. In your article, you say almost 80% of defendants who received probation were released prior to, or who received probation were released prior to incarceration, while only about 11% of those receiving jail were released, and 12% of those receiving prison. Now, this means to me that people who are out on bail before the sentencing are more likely to get probation versus the people who are stuck in jail and they're sitting there because they can't make bail.
Right.
So this is like discrimination of the poor. I can't make bail, so I sit here. And I was a news reporter for many years, and I did a lot of sentencing and trials. So then you have the trial comes. You have the defendant who comes in with the orange jail garb on, who is handcuffed, who is a lot of times shackled, brought into the courtroom. Now, a lot of times the jurors don't see that entry, but that's what how they look. But if
Right.
they're out on bail and then they're coming to court, they're coming in, a lot of them have suit and tie, woman a dress, nicely dressed, very
Mhm.
nicely groomed. That's got to have an make an impression on the jurors, the judge, but it happens all the time. So that's why I say it's discrimination against the poor, because if you're poor and you can't make bail, then you're not out, and it's a snowballing effect.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's absolutely the case. And this is this is the big thing that people are the reason why people are advocating nationally for the elimination of cash bail, because it really has a lot to do with what your financial resources are, what the financial resources of your family are, and it does have a very, very large impact on punishment decisions. And this is not something I've done, this type of research in a lot of different places in Pennsylvania, in Michigan, and consistently we find this exact same thing, that if an individual is able to make bail or receive an ROR and be released prior to sentencing, they're much less likely to serve time incarcerated. And they're also much less likely, or they usually, if they are incarcerated, they typically receive shorter sentences. And it makes complete sense when we're thinking about perceptions of blameworthiness and protection of the community and practical constraints. Practical constraints are pretty much eliminated because the person is already incarcerated.
Mhm.
And so it's just extending that incarceration. And then who looks more blameworthy and dangerous? The person who is shackled in the jumpsuit, or someone who walks in with their family in street clothes or in dress clothes? So that absolutely has a big impact. It also has a big impact on the plea bargain that individuals willing to accept. Because I think any of us can put ourselves in the shoes of an individual who is being incarcerated and holding out for a better plea bargain. You have to sit in jail that entire time until that plea bargain is reached, where if somebody's out in the community and they're working and they're around their families, then it's much easier for that individual to kind of hold out for a better deal than it is if somebody's incarcerated. Because I think as I said, if you put yourself in their shoes, most of us would just want to get out as soon as we could.
Right.
So instead of waiting for the DA to offer us probation, we may say, you know what, I'll just take the 30 days because then I at least know I'll be out in 30 days.
Absolutely.
So it has a huge impact. Absolutely. And then too, a lot of times with sentences, they will be given credit for the time served. So it may be, that you receive 90 days, but you only have to serve an additional month or something like that. So those deals definitely look more attractive to individuals who are trying to get out versus people who are in the community currently.
We're going to come back and talk a little bit more about that plea bargain part of it, but also going back to just being out prior to sentencing. If you're out, when you go to sentencing, you have the ability to say, well, for the lawyer to say this is a good person because since the trial and from the trial to the sentence, he's had a great job. He's taking care of his family. He's done this, all these wonderful things. But that person who could not make bail, they can't say that because they're stuck
Right.
inside. So they can't, you can't give those positive things for them because they never
Right.
had the opportunity.
Right. And or at least much more limited opportunity.
Right.
And I mean, any defense attorney is going to tell their client when they're waiting for sentencing, go back and get your GED, start GED classes, go into treatment if there's a substance abuse issue, be working, have a job, because all of those things are absolutely going to matter because they're all things that the judge considers, and they also impact a risk level. So whether somebody's more likely to reoffend or not, because someone who is community engaged and working full time is much less likely to reoffend than somebody who doesn't have those things.
Right. Okay, we're going to take a break. We'll be back. We will talk about, let's go back to the plea bargaining again, because I have a few more questions to ask about that. Stay with us. I'm talking to Tina Freiburger. We're talking about prison, sentencing, jail, probation, all those things, disparities. So stay with us. We'll be right back.
I know what you're thinking. I need a job.
I need a new career.
Well, I've been there.
I've been there.
I've been there. I wasn't happy with what I was doing.
After high school, I didn't have a plan.
I just wanted to start working.
I got laid off twice, but you gotta keep going.
You just need the right skills. Find an apprenticeship.
I found a 2-year IT program.
I found a medical course online.
I'm now a consultant in the tech space.
You have more options than you think. You can do this.
You will find something.
You will find something new.
Show some respect. Show you give a damn. Show the world how it's done. Show them that when your community needed you the most, you showed up. Mask up, America.
Welcome back to the 411 Live, talking with Tina Freiburger. And when we left, we were talking about plea bargains. And I wanted to talk a little bit more about that. When you think about the folks who are, they have a crime, they're convicted, or before the conviction, they are accused. There is the plea bargain kind of thing because they're stuck in jail. They can't make bail. They're frightened. They have obligations, whatever. And then they take a plea bargain. You told me a story once about, some incident. A bunch of people are arrested, put in jail, and then maybe one or two, they didn't do it, but they took the plea bargain because it's like, I want to get out.
Right.
But then afterwards, there was no case really. The incident fell through or whatever, but they'd already taken the plea bargain, so they can't get out of that. Is that right?
Right. That is correct. So once they have a conviction, that conviction is going to stand unless there's a pardon or something really extreme and very rare like that. So yeah, there actually have been cases where there's been individuals arrested. And I know, like Frontline did a really interesting piece on a story where a large number of people were arrested from a housing complex. And some of the individuals who were not able to make bail took plea bargains to be able to get out. Because again, if we put ourselves in those individual shoes, we're concerned about losing our job. We're concerned about, who's going to be taking care of our children, what's happening with our children. So they took plea bargains to get out. And then later on, it was discovered that the arrest was made on bad information. So there wasn't actually any drug activity. There was no illegal activity. So all the charges were dropped. But for the individuals who pled guilty, even though at that point that they know there was no actual offenses committed, those convictions held. And that does happen. That does occur in the system. And it's not, just one case that was out there and picked up because it was sensational. It does occur. People plead guilty, are more likely to plead guilty for an offense if they have to sit in jail, if they're not able to be out and being able to advocate on their behalf. And again, individuals want to get home and they want to get back to the things, their responsibilities that they have. So, we think about all these ideal situations and we think about media and, fictional stories and, even true stories where they are, highlighted, where people hold out because they're not guilty. And we want to believe that, well, if somebody's not guilty, they'll never say that they did something. Right. But we actually know that happens all the time. And it happens for very good reason. And like I said, if we take a minute and put ourselves in those individual shoes, you can see how those decisions are made or why those decisions are made.
Yeah. It seems the criminal justice system is skewed in a way that puts a poor person at a disadvantage.
It does, absolutely. Not only, not only with wealth, but also with education. And, it's really surprising how little people really know about their rights. It's very shocking how little people know about the power that they actually have. And for a lot of people, what they know is from what they've seen on TV. And I personally think that we should make more of an effort to educate people on what their rights are, because it's important. And you don't know when you're going to be. Nobody knows when they could be in a situation where those things are going to be highly beneficial to them. To know, what rights they have, and to know, what they can say no to.
Right. It's a balancing act, because when somebody does a terrible crime, you want them to go through the criminal justice system and you want them to be put away. But so take care of those people, but you also want the system to be fair.
Right, absolutely. And even if we're thinking of people who really did do something terrible, I mean, is it fair if one person fares better in the end because they had more knowledge than someone else who did the exact same thing? Again, we want to think of our system as equal and as fair and as blind to these types of things. So all of that stuff becomes blurred, when these things when there's these kind of disparities against our population.
Okay, let's talk about another thing that was in the report, and that being, this surprised me. Young Black males receive shorter jail sentences. But when I read more of the article, then it all made sense. So why is it? So we already said young Black males are more likely to be incarcerated in jail than any other group. And now we're saying young Black males are more likely to get a shorter sentence. Weigh that out for me.
Right. Well, it's most likely because Black men are being sentenced for lower level offenses. So when you think about, like, when we're looking at the decision between probation and jail, young Black men are receiving jail, whereas other individuals who committed the same offense are receiving probation. So that leads us to young Black men being sentenced to jail for more minor offenses, thereby they're receiving shorter sentences. So it's really, that's skewing the results, because we have offenses for which Black men are going to jail, but nobody else is going to jail for. They're going to probation. They're getting probation for it, or some kind of community sanction for it.
Right. And while you might say, well, they're getting a short sentence, so that's good. But when you go to jail for a day, there are repercussions for that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I really reject that argument. And that is actually something that's made in the scholarly pool too, in the scholar area, that some scholars say that, well, these like race and these variables, they don't have nearly as large of an effect as, the severity of offense, a prior record. But I really disregard that, because if somebody is spending a minute incarcerated or receiving at all a more serious punishment because of their race or their age, then that's just a complete dereliction of our society, of our system, because that is not what our system is supposed to be doing. And to me, it's totally unfair and it's completely unacceptable.
Right. Because when you think about the impact, you have a record, you may have a tough time getting a job because of that.
Absolutely.
Family situation, if you don't have a job, there's no income coming in, or, what happens to the children. There's so many people who are affected by that.
Absolutely. And then there's also a stigma that is associated with that too, because then the person has served time in jail. So even if it is a short time period, they lose their job, they have to try to find a new job, and they have to go out on the job market trying to find a new job with, I was just incarcerated, and so it does have an impact. Absolutely.
One of your findings, and I think I read this, where a Black female is the most likely to get probation versus jail or prison.
Yeah, and actually, a colleague and I did a study in Michigan, and we found the exact same thing. Because of restrictions with the data that was available, we couldn't really identify why that was. However, I did do some research in Pennsylvania that did have just kind of more data available on various impacts or various factors. And one of the things that I found was a big decision maker for judges was if somebody was caretaker of children, the sole caretaker of children. So they were responsible for caring for children without like another individual in the home who could take over those duties. Then judges were much more likely to try to give that person probation if that was a reasonable sanction. So when the decision between a community sanction and jail, the judges tended to try to kind of give that person a chance by keeping them in the community, because, and this relates back to the practical constraints, just with the social cost is so high for society to incarcerate someone who, is that 24/7 caretaker of children. So that could be what's going on here. And it could be operating through one or two ways, or through both possibly. Is that simply Black women in Milwaukee County are just more likely to be in that situation? Or it could just also relate back to kind of the stereotypic ideal of, Black women being more likely to be taking care of their children without a male partner.
Right. Gotcha. Okay, Tina, if I could give you a magic wand and I said, okay, fix this, what would you do?
Oh, I mean, whenever there's a decision to be made, there's always going to be some level of human error. But that being said, this is really not a place where we can accept error. So, it's a difficult thing. I mean, if I would have a magical wand, I would probably consider maybe that we just need a different system entirely that isn't based on any kind of social factors, but that system would have to be part of a society where those things also didn't matter. So we're probably will take a magic wand for us to get there in our lifetimes, but that doesn't mean that we still can't move the needle. So, we just need to continue to, advocate for these things, to talk about these things, to recognize these things, and, do everything that we can to correct these things when we discover them.
Very good. And you will continue to do this with your research. So I thank you for that.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Tina Freiburger is the Dean of the Helen Bader School of Social Welfare at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. Tina, I thank you. It has been a really good conversation, and thank you for the research that brings a lot of the stuff to light.
Thank you for having me.
Sure thing. And thank you for joining us for another episode of the 411 Live. Remember, we are a nonprofit organization, so if you would like to help us out, please go to our website, the411live.org, and there you can donate. Thank you again for joining us, and if you would like to see other episodes, of course you can do that, and we invite you to do that. And please come back again for another episode of the 411 Live, Real People, Real Talk. I'm Beverly Taylor. If you would like to check out past episodes, there are many ways. Go to your favorite podcast platform, follow us on Twitter and Instagram, like and watch us on Facebook, watch and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And if you have suggestions for future episodes, go to our website, the411live.org.